Hi everyone, this is episode 7 of Mechs and Miniatures, the podcast with PMW, myself, João Costa, and I'm joined with.
with Rick Graham, creator of Revelations and Revelations Skirmish.
Alright, so for this episode, we are going to be talking about rules and how rules can both help and hinder in attracting players to your game, the game that you are designing, or the game that you are interested in. But first, we're actually going to do like a quick segment about budgeting issues, and more out of how we approach designing the game. Considering we are both indie creators, we don't have a lot of money to make the games, and of course, time is money. So most of the money we are investing in the game is our time and our skills. So considering to design a game, we have art, we have rules, we have writing fiction, we have printing, painting, and preparing models, for example, for display, for showcasing on social media. We have advertising, we have dealing with the community. All that can cost time and can cost money. So, Rick, in terms of revelations, how do you approach this subject and these particular areas of development?
Well, because, like you said, the money is not infinite, you have to be very strategic with what you do.
Right,
And it depends on what is needed at that time. If I said, for the most part, what is the thing that's needed the most? Well, in relation to Revelation Skirmish, the thing that would be needed the most for money to be spent would be on models. Um, and normally that it depends. Certain modelers require concept art. Sometimes I just have a really good idea, so I have to have it in concept art first. But in the scheme of things, if you wanted to just go ahead and say, all right, this is the budget for both concept art and model, you could lump them together. It's not that much difference in the grand scheme of things, and that would probably be the most important thing. But that's because I can write the lore and I can write the rules and I can write the stats. So I'm covering lots of other places financially
right,
by time and like you said, skill set, as opposed to paying someone to make sure that they do it.
right. Um, in terms of my approach for Black Star, I'm 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 trying to get the money to cover the parts of designing the game, of developing the game that I'm not good at. So if I want, for particularly, I tend to be the type of 3D modeler that um, really prefers to have a really good detailed concept in front of me so I can work much faster, because if I'm doing the concept during the modeling stage, I tend to take a lot more time modeling because I keep trying stuff and then I'm not sure about the shapes and then I keep changing things. If you give me like a solid concept, yeah, I can work much faster. And so that's one particular approach I'm taking. I've hired concept artists to design some of the mechs for Black Star. In fact, most of them I haven't designed, and I can tell you I will be hiring artists to do the some of the digital painting, particularly when it concerns characters, because I can take a more technological scenes like the mech in a mech bay or something like that, and I can do a render and then I can work on top of it doing painted art. Even though there are people better than me, of course, but that's always the same in every field. Um, but when it comes to characters, I'm not good at painting characters and doing characters and any of that. So if I need pilot portraits or the portrait of one of the particular characters in the lore, even if it's just for the rule book or something like that, I'm going out and hiring people to do it. So I'm basically compensating my flaws by hiring people who are good at that, and I'm keeping my strengths, and so I'm not really hiring anyone to do the mech models because those I can do myself, and it saves me money that way. More funds to things that I really can't do correctly.
Right, which makes sense.
In terms of advertising, I mean, you can do some advertising. Obviously, we don't have the budget of big companies, but it's not really that expensive to run like campaigns every now and then on Instagram or Facebook or whatever you feel like doing. You're a writer, so you're not hiring anyone to write. Um,
Well, I mean, I would like to.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, I would. Um,
But would that mean that you would just be supervising while you do other stuff, and only that person would be writing, or would you both be writing together?
the way that I saw it looking down the road was that I would still be writing, let's say, the core story,
Mm-hmm.
but there are so many other um, avenues to explore. Like, if I went down and told a story in all of the main factions, that would take several years.
Right.
And some of those stories, while they add flesh to the bones of the entire universe, they don't necessarily need to be told by me.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been very open to the idea of eventually hiring other authors. I'm trying to talk to one person right now, but it just depends, and it's going to be more of a financial thing. Like, I'm much more comfortable because I've done it so many times now of hiring a concept artist or hiring a modeler. Those things I got down. I have a pretty good process in place. With an author, I have to kind of like let them into my mind differently, and they have to be able to know things that other people don't know yet because it's not released. So, or maybe they're ideas that aren't fully formed, and that's fun in that it would free me up to kind of move certain things off of my plate. I would definitely like another author um, who can write short stories, because I think some of the stories don't need to be these grand trilogies or
Right.
something bigger. They can be just a 30, 40, 50 page short story that can do exactly what I need it to, and add um, other places for people to experience revelations.
Right. Right. Um, what about playtesting? Because I've been watching a lot of videos on the Jamie Stegmaier channel. He's the designer
Hmm.
of Sight, among several other games. He
Yeah.
has his channel is very focused, for people that don't know, on the design side of designing a lot of these board games and card games and all that. And he considers one of the best things he has invested money on actually getting blind playtesting, which is basically hiring people to that he doesn't know, people even from on the other side of the world, because then you have different cultures, different mentalities, to actually play test his games and then get hopefully, obviously, constructive feedback. um, this is something I actually plan on doing, because he totally sold me on that idea when I watched his video.
Um, for myself, I actually have put no brain power to thinking about paid playtesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, right now, I'm just in a phase where, with a board game, everything is isolated in that. Everything is in that one box. Yeah, you could sell expansions, but otherwise, the entire experience can be in that one box. And with miniature games, especially like mine, Black Star will have a much smaller catalog at first of units and other things that the players can do, and then you can add a lot to it. But at this point, looking for me, I was talking to a player who wanted to become one of our more of like official playtesters,
Right.
and we had one conversation so far, and it became very clear that they're very new to the game still, so they're still adding information for themselves, just like as a player, would need to, and then they were trying to be very strategic of, um, we'll test this and this and this, and we'll have different systematic ways of testing things. But when I was bringing up the conversation of, well, what about um, environmental conditions and how that can now affect how effective one particular unit is. So if that unit is really good in like clear conditions, and then you change the environment, now it affects its weapon type. Now that unit is much less effective, but it's difficult to go through and test all these different things and the different game modes and the different objectives, and then who's the attacker, who's the defender, which units are they fielding. There's so much more to test. I am sure that if we had a much larger budget, there would be somebody who could be deputized to kind of be, the overseer and be very systematic. Okay, we are going to do this group of testing. We've broken it down into sections. This month will be all about this thing, and have a team of people or several teams, really. So right now, I'm more just focused on volunteer play testers and then going from there. But I can see the benefit in paying for play testing if you got quality feedback, even if they don't like it, as long as you got enough feedback to make it worth it, that would be very beneficial.
Right. What works and what doesn't. And that is very specifically about rules, game mechanics, and the flow of the game, which
Hmm.
actually brings us to the main topic of today's podcast, which is like an adaptation of one of the questions the community gave us in the previous one, which is how deep do the rules need to go before having it overwhelming for new players. So, if playtesters come back to you, volunteer or paid, it doesn't matter. If they come back to you and say, these are people that have an interest in playing your game, and supposedly they did do some background homework on trying to learn it, and they still think it's overwhelming, you better really take a good critical look at it to see if it's just the traditional like learning curve that you have when you're trying to learn a new thing, or if there is actually a problem there communicating the ideas, the mechanics of your game to new players. So
Right.
how deep do the rules need to go before it's overwhelming?
um I think every developer is going to come at this from a different angle. Everyone's going to look at it and say, the first thing you have to be clear on is, what is your objective of the game. um in the game itself, you may have, like, it may be to make money, it may be to tell compelling stories, it may be for players to be able to experience what it's like to be a part of my universe. Whatever your main objective is in the creative side, that's one thing. But as far as in the game specifically within that box, what is your objective? And everyone's going to come at that different. Some people who really love large scale combat, like maybe that you might be able to experience in Warhammer 40K or in other larger scaled tables, of gameplay. Um, it's going to be very different than someone who's playing Kill Team or Infinity, where you've like, or Black Star, because you're going to have less models on the table. So the experience has to be very different.
Yeah.
And I can mostly only speak for myself. And I can say some things that I've experienced where I'm like, the rules of these other engines got a little too deep. With Revelation Skirmish, I don't want any player to feel like they have to have a college degree to keep up with the rules. I don't want anyone to feel like they have to be an academic scholar in order to comprehend and break down. Okay, so you're saying take all of this, 3, 4, 500 pages of rules, and then you're gonna bring it all together and we're gonna roll dice.
Not just
There
that.
has to be, well, what?
Yeah, not just that. I remember cases in BattleTech where like the okay, the rules for this specific situation are on page 88 of Master Rules, but then a specific part of this specific situation is in page 127 of the compendium, and then you have this additional side rule because of the scenario we are playing that is in page 25 of the scenario book, and then you're like browsing all these books just to resolve one dice roll.
Right. And then you're going to forget it again, probably, because
Yeah,
that's usually what happens is you spent so much time trying to answer it that you some people are amazing at remembering all the rules and remembering lots of minutia, but I don't know if that's as much for the casual player and definitely not maybe as much for the average player. There's usually in a group it seems one or two people who really excel at the rules and then most of the other people are just there to have fun.
yeah,
So they're not attaching themselves to multiple rule books. Actually, I've been playing, for example, Star Wars Legion, and that's my game away kind of thing. And we have players in our group who have never read the rules. They have learned from everybody else. They've never the rules are free. They've
yeah,
never downloaded them.
yeah.
So they are entirely riding on the others who do know. And we've had rules corrections, and then sometimes someone will be upset, like, oh, and just jokingly, like, oh, all this time I've been doing this. Like, well, dude, you might have discovered we were making a mistake if you would have been the one to open up the rule book ever.
Yeah.
So you can't be upset that you've not had the opportunity to take advantage of the correct way when you yourself never took the time to look into it ever. Um,
You
yeah,
know,
and
yeah,
you
go.
have the issue of multiple books creates a really big burden,
Yeah,
I think. I personally feel. Now, if you're doing your main rules and then you're doing a scenario, that's a different thing because you may use a campaign book, you may use some 1 or 2 page printout from the game developer so that you can play, and that's different. But when you have 4 different manuals to jump back and forth in to make sure you're playing the full experience. And that's if someone's getting into that, they might be. And that's where is it getting overwhelming? It depends. New players are going to have a problem for sure because they're still trying to just grasp the basic the basic mechanics.
well,
But advanced players might like that.
I'm sure advanced players will like that, right? Because it's different when we are saying when we are criticizing or telling okay, this game has like 6 different books, each book has 200 pages and all that, but you
Hmm.
don't actually need all of that if you just want like some quick action, like a quick match with a few units to each side, right? If you actually, even if in the case of those like you mentioned, those people that never read the Star Wars Legion rules, right? If they find themselves in a campaign where you are having to manage like in terms of battletech, which is the example I always give, especially because I used to be games master for battletech. um, you have a full campaign, you're dealing with all your units, inventory, pilots, you're dealing with planetary conditions, you're dealing with the enemies, you're dealing with logistics, you're dealing with even out of that particular planet, the planetary system, or a larger conflict at scale. So of course you are consulting several different books, right? But that's not the fault of the game, because in order to make the game that complex with a full campaign and all the systems that accompany it, you will probably have to reference different books, and that's where a good games master comes into play.
Right.
But you also touch on a point, which is, yes, we have to have clear rules, well written rules, and preferably some sort of free PDF with just some basic rules that we can get off the ground. But still, the best way to learn how to play a game is if other people who know how to play teach you.
Yes.
Because I was trying to remember how did I actually learn how to play these games? Was it because I studied the rules like I had a math exam or something? No, it was because I saw other people play, and then I started playing with them, and they kind of explained to me how to play as we went along. which creates a particular challenge that is, if no one is playing your game, you're missing that component of people teaching other people how to play it.
Well, that is true. And I know that when I am talking to a player, like on my Discord server,
Yeah.
sometimes people will ask a rules question. And first off, I get really excited because it means someone's reading the rules and they're trying to play. Um, but I try to make sure that my tone is not coming across as a know-it-all or like, aren't you stupid? Why can't you read the book? It's right there. Trying to make sure that, look, it's fine. Ask a question. There's just I'm trying to be helpful instead. Um, and it, I know firstly, it comes down a lot to how the rules are presented and trying to structure things in a semi-intelligent way. And different people are going to come to the rules and they're going to say, it'd be so much better if it was organized like X instead of the way you did it. Maybe if you've take the time to make sure you tried to put a decent amount of care into organization and the way that it's explained, you know, it's the better way to do it. And that sounds really straightforward, but I've heard of people saying that, like, you run into different rules or in different lore supplements and such, and you're like, there's all kinds of spelling errors. There's all kinds of just basic grammatical errors, and
Yeah.
that creates a burden for the players sometimes because if it's worded too funky, then it starts getting like, okay, do we play rules as worded or rules as implied?
Yeah,
And
that
that's and
yeah.
that affects players really, really hard because then that makes them draw a line and say, which way are you going to fall on the fence? Are you going to go left? Are you going to go right? And that's not good to put those players in that situation.
That gives rise to heated discussions. No, 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 the rule is
Oh yeah,
exactly like this. No, no, this is just an abstraction and we need to interpret the rule.
right.
Yeah.
And that's where it starts getting into like this weird errata where the game developer or someone on the team says, "Oh no, this is what was intended." Okay, now we all need to read this sentence in the rule book on page 63 intended to be this sort of outcome. And it would just be better just go back and fix it.
Yeah. Or
Just,
or maybe or maybe the
assuming it's not like
errata
groundbreaking.
or maybe the errata is just adding one word in there. Because I've seen that, and that single word in there basically clears the entire thing. So it
Mhm.
was a matter of actually making sure that it was clear in the first place.
Yes. And there's going to be some error because it doesn't seem that any even of the big companies have their rules completely perfect, like we
Well,
said.
people are human, right?
Yeah, right. And and I am already of the mindset of someone who's trying to be fairly competitive when playing, and I'm also someone who looks for loopholes, um, if not even just to protect myself. So I look for what could someone do against me, and and trying to figure out ways of when it comes to list building or certain keywords that appear to be more powerful than others, and stuff like that to try to because you're trying to win. So I come at it from that perspective of, and that's sometimes like if I'm playing like it's usually more of a board game because it's something that everyone's kind of learning at the same time. I'm trying to see where is a place to get an edge. And it's not because I have to win at any cost. It's because if other people don't see the hole that I do, I might be able to be the first one to take advantage of it and I could win. And, that happens in miniature games too. And I don't know if all of the rule sets are designed by people who have that mindset. So then they're surprised that somebody found that issue and then exploited it. And I'm expecting people to come back eventually and say, Rick, we figured out 5 ways to break your game. Or we figured out 5 ways to take advantage of things that maybe the casual player won't notice, but the competitive player will. And it'll ruin the fun for the casual player.
I think most of these games are a bit like that. No, I think really, if you can see that in video games as well. If you are designing video games for the competitive crowd and you go too far into it, most of the casuals will either have fun but aren't really playing the game to any like skillful level. They're just having some dumb fun, or the game is entirely inaccessible to casual players if because you have all this. The only thing that works to win matches is like this super munchy min maxing. uh, these three abilities are OP, so you only use these three abilities, and that tends to turn off a lot of people.
Oh yeah.
Um, and in going a little back to the rules, I do think graphic design helps a lot. The way you present the rules, I've seen rule books. I know a lot of games and people don't have those skills or don't have money to invest in that, but I've seen games that the rules don't even seem, when I see people play them, I don't think the game is super complex, but I look at the rules and it's like this short booklet only with text. And that does make it hard to get into. And if you have good graphic design to present the rules elements, it would make life easier. Like, for example, having some clear diagrams. I see those elements where you have one unit and another unit, and you present the range visually or the arc of fire visually, and that really makes it clear exactly how the line of sight works, or how the range works, or how the arc of fire works, stuff like that. And obviously, all this takes time to do, these graphical elements, but I do think they help. Because what would you rather see when you are when you are browsing a rules booklet? Do you want to see like a nice graphic which is easy and fast to understand, or do you want to read three paragraphs of text describing that single image?
Well, yeah. Yeah. And that's why with Revelation Skirmish, our rules are free. You can download them at any point, and when they're updated for everybody. In the sense of like you can go and download the newest update on our stats website. Those are updated live immediately as soon as I hit save. But the rules, I update them every year or every 6 months. It depends on how things are going with feedback. Not making like huge fundamental changes. Sometimes it's just a few words and it fixes the wording so that it made sense to me, but it's because it's in my head, but I need it to make sense to you because you're the one reading it. And for the first, let's say the first two versions, three versions, because if you count 1.0, uh, I didn't have very many graphical elements to help players. In version 1.3, I made sure to add some for that reason, and it was more because I didn't know what was the best way to go forward with it as a developer. I knew it would be helpful, but I didn't have like inspiration of like, okay, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to do it. This is how I'm going to do it. And then with version 1.3, which is the current one as of this recording, I figured out a way to solve that for a couple of them. And because I know exactly what you mean, is it going to be easier to have to go to the community and ask a bunch of other people, "Hey guys, I don't understand what the developer was trying to say here," uh, or is it easier to just put up a quick image of what a rear arc is? When is it considered an attack into the rear arc, and when is it not? It's a lot faster for them to just see a picture with some units on the table and some colored line elements or whatever you need for that particular rule to make it very clear this is in, this is out,
Yeah,
rather than trying to explain.
because we have to be realistic, right? There's a lot of things competing for people's attention. you have
Mm-hmm.
you have other games that you like, for example Star Wars Legion, right? So if someone is trying to get you to invest in playing, I don't know, War Machine or Infinity, they better make the game system really clear to understand, even if of course you don't know like the entire rules. At least you can't feel lost. It needs to feel clearer, and this is exactly the type of thing that graphic design does and typography does. Because again, we have all been there with the whole I have a school report and it needs to be 2 pages and I only have 1 page of text, so I'm gonna increase the font size and increase the spacing between the fonts, and maybe make one clear line of between paragraphs. So we've all been there. The way, same information, different way it's displayed. So that same information can be perceived quite differently depending on the way it's presented. And this is critical. If you give someone like a veritable wall of text, they will, even if they're interested in the game and even if the text is well written, they will have a harder time understanding it, and they will have a harder time really getting it into their brains. On the flip side, if you just present graphical elements, it's probably not enough to really grasp the entire thing. So you need a mix, and you need good typography, and you need to guide the reader's eyes all over the page, just like when you are designing the composition for a page in a comic book, and the layout of the vignettes and the layout of the action. There are good ways to do it and bad ways to do it. You need to guide the reader uh, to understand the information that is on the page, and that is the same for anything, for comics, for game systems, for rules, for knowledge. If you're studying like sciences or a history book, and I've been accompanying obviously my daughters as they're going through school, and I can see how some books are really easy to get into and some books are really hard to get into depending on the way they are presenting the materials on the pages. So
Yeah.
don't underestimate the way that you present the rules. If you're just putting a wall, a block of text on a page, it might be the Shakespeare of game mechanic rules, but it will be harder to get into, um, as opposed to trying to guide the reader through that text with typography, with colors, with spacing, and with graphical images. So I
Yeah,
would
and that's
say that is definitely that can be overwhelming. There is depth in the way that you present rules, even if the rules themselves are simple. Does that make sense?
yes. Well, and if you have the mindset of less is more,
Yeah,
in terms of text for rules, it can be better. Because like I could go on and on and on. I could write a whole page about performing an attack. But does anyone want to read that when they're like, okay, but Rick, what is the basic way? I just want to roll dice. What do I
yeah,
need to know to roll dice? And some people are going to be like that. Other people are going to be like, no, I want to understand everything you have to say because you know, I'm super smart and I'm going to break it all down afterward. But you want to present it so that the casual player who's just there, life is stressful and they're just trying to have some fun for a couple of hours, and they don't want it to feel like a burden to play your game. They want it to flow nicely for them. Uh, there are some people who enjoy being a rules lawyer and who enjoy just more dedication to a rule set than maybe what's necessary. But it's most. I don't think most people want that. They want it to feel like it flows naturally. And one thing, this is a good thing to hit on, is how when it comes to the depth of rules that you need for a new player, when it comes to the topic of math, because basically every
all right,
miniatures game is going to involve math of some sort,
yeah,
you know. Um, and I am of the mindset that you need modifiers because if you have no modifiers in your game and you just say, okay, this is what you need to roll to hit the other enemy unit, or this is what you need to save your unit, or this is how much damage you'll do depending on your game mechanics. It's If you don't have modifiers, the game will feel very stale very quick. There's less that you can do. So you need modifiers in order to widen the horizon for the variety that you can have in your unit catalog so that all units feel different and they don't end up feeling like duplicates just with red or blue paint kind of thing. But you don't want to go so far into the math where you have like lots and lots of tables, lots and lots of modifiers that someone has to remember from all these other ancillary rules, and then
And three separate tables that are on two different pages.
yeah, and then end up combining it and be like, okay, so what is all these modifiers? It's 10.
Yeah.
Like it's not even like complicated math, but there's just so much to look through. So I tried to when I with Revelation Skirmish to present it where it's very basic math. It's just simple addition. That's pretty much it. Um, if you ever go past an 11 defense from modifiers, you just can't even make the shot. So everyone can count to 11 because they got most people are going to have 10 digits to count on their hands. And then, well, I'm out of fingers. Well, then you're too high. It's really easy.
No,
Um,
Rick, because I have some dexterity in my feet. I have 20 fingers, so I'm gonna be the ultimate Revelations player.
I guess, but as soon as you get to those toes, you need to stop because you're too high.
No. I'm gonna pull out my monkey. I have like a pet monkey at home, and he's gonna proxy play for me.
Well, that's OP. You broke the rule set. Thank you.
He
Now we have to
has
make a rule. No monkeys.
again.
Why is that rule in here? Well,
Yeah,
sometimes one person.
you can't use four hands, and you can't use pet monkeys. So the rules will pile up, and then pretty soon you'll have a 300-page rule book full of this.
Yeah, right. And that sometimes does happen,
Yeah,
or and
but that is overwhelming, right?
if you set down for me a rule book that's over 50 pages of actual rules, because sometimes you get like sticker shock kind of thing where you're like, you look down, you're like, that's 100 pages in a rule book. Well, but then you figure out, okay, some of it's advertising, some of it is fluff, some of it is just pictures of of painted models at the end of the book or something.
Yeah.
So you're like, okay, but the rules really are 50, 60, 70 pages. Okay, that I can digest that. But if you set down something as thick as a Bible and you're like, okay, no, this is actually all rules, I'm not interested. I don't want to play. It's too much.
And
It's too much.
I can give obviously it's not like an exact rule in BattleTech, but if you're asking the player to consider, okay, I'm firing into this mech, he moved, I moved, uh, this is medium range, he's standing in heavy woods. Okay, that is somewhat simple, right? But then when you go and add, no, those heavy woods are adjacent to two other heavy woods, and they are on fire. So now it's not considered just a heavy woods on fire. It's considered a firewall because it's three hexes of heavy woods, and I'm standing in water, and I'm on in level -1, and the heavy woods are in level +2. But since one of the heavy woods is +2 and it forms a firewall with the other heavy woods, they are all considered in +2. So I have to check. I mean, you're going into levels, all right? You're going into rules stuff that is beyond what a normal player will want to get into. Now, is it bad that you have like this separate book on the side with all these optional rules, like that if the mech flicks the right finger of the middle finger of the right hand while he's lifting his foot 30 degrees in the air and and he did a cartwheel before and the other mech has a hat, is there a rule for this? Yes, it's in the fourth book on page 188. Is it bad that you have like this kind of depth? Not necessarily. There are people who love it. But this needs to be like a totally separate layer and not actually in the main rules of the main game, and not actually necessary for you to enjoy having just a regular match of the game. Because that will overwhelm new players, for sure.
Oh yeah.
And
Well, yeah.
BattleTech had a lot of that stuff, you know.
When I as a BattleTech player, um, I've only ever played with the standard rules.
Right.
I haven't even. I guess I dabbled a couple like 15 years ago in a little bit further depth, but at the time everything was only available physically. So if the book was sold out, you didn't have the rules. So, that's definitely an upside to having PDFs available
Oh
in
yeah.
this day and age is,
Yeah.
yeah, it's much better to have a nicely printed, hardback book. But if you can't do that, at least I can still read at least what the rule is, on my phone.
For
And
us, for the kids, I think a lot of them like actually reading in the tablets and all that. I still don't like an electronic reading. I still like my comic books on paper. But yeah, I've met some kids who are like who just prefer to read the PDFs on the iPad or something. It's a generational thing.
yeah, I mean, I know there's plenty of adults who like to read digitally just because they like to be able to carry around one device as opposed to books.
Yeah,
Um, but it
a backpack of rule books.
right.
I know I'm an outlier in this case because I was the GM of our campaigns, but I literally had to like bring a backpack full of books like I was in school whenever we had a match. And I regularly had like three books open at the same time and maybe a few auxiliary papers for those particular missions and all that. But again, bit of an outlier because I had to be the guy that had all those materials, you know.
Yeah,
Again,
and
most of them didn't even own a lot of those books. They knew how to play, and a few of them had the main rule book, you know, and had some miniatures, and the rest was supplied by me, basically.
right. And BattleTech is one of those games where it is designed to be more of a simulator.
Yeah,
So it's meant to be more grindy. And that is what it's aiming to do. So when you say, "Oh, it has lots of rules," well, that's what it's meant to do. You know, checkers is not intended to be like that, even though it's a much older game, but checkers, is meant to be very simple.
but it has
So,
depth,
yes, it can.
and
And
chess
that's
has depth.
yes. So that's where I was where my approach has been is, you have a combined arms miniatures game with Revelation Skirmish, but each unit class fills a different type of role on the battlefield. And then you have other components of the game that add tactical depth, but none of them are overly complicated in their own right. So that way someone can feel they can start getting more creative with how am I going to try to win? What is my objective? Okay, how am I going to try to achieve this objective against my opponent? And it's more of um, keywords that change modifiers or a couple of simple to understand modifiers that stack up and how that affects the game. And that way it's simpler to pick up, it's simpler to comprehend, it's simpler for you to become pretty adept at the rules. That's my intention. And that you're able to jump in without feeling like you had to spend a couple of months reading. Now, games like Infinity scare me as a player because I've heard from several people you should just go ahead and plan on for the first year you're going to lose every game you play.
What?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm not familiar
because
with
it's
that.
so competitive
Right.
and there's so much more nuance into that game that I've heard from two people now who were very deep that said the same thing and didn't know each other. So it was like, "Oh, this is just the thing you guys just understand." And for me as a player, I recognize if I'm playing against a veteran player who's been playing for a couple of years and I'm just coming into things, I'm not going to dominate the field, right?
Yeah,
I'm
that's
just
normal.
you're going to have to take some bumps because you don't understand the mechanics clicking together as well as the experienced players. But if you tell me that it's going to take me months and months or a whole year to kind of fully grasp things, I'm tapping out anyway because I just don't. That sounds like it's going to be so much work to have a chance that I'm not as a player. I'm not interested in.
Yeah,
Even as a competitive player, I just like That's I don't even know if I like the game yet, and you're already telling me just go ahead and prepare to lose. Well,
it's funny.
okay.
It's funny because I'm not familiar with the way Infinity plays. I'm familiar with the miniatures and they are really cool. But I was under the impression Infinity was one of those fast playing skirmish games. I didn't know they had so much depth.
Well, I don't think it's so much like the rules aren't intense. It's how everything clicks together and there's cohesiveness, as I understand it.
Hmm.
So there's you just don't understand all the combinations that you can run into as a player
Right.
because the multiple factions, a pretty wide catalog of units, and then all of how all that clicks together. There's a lot more nuance in that game than what appears maybe on the surface. So now, if you were just playing with just your group of friends and all of you are getting at the same time, yeah, you're gonna win some games simply because you're playing against other inexperienced players as you're all learning. But the moment you move into a, a player base who's been there, you're gonna get moved aside pretty easy. It sounds like.
But there's a very easy example to give in terms of overwhelming new players, right? Because again, there's nothing wrong with grindy types of games existing. In fact, it's a good thing that you have more casual games, more hardcore games, more simple games, more complex games. That's fine because different people have different tastes. But you
Absolutely.
but you can see a clear example in BattleTech versus MechWarrior Dark Age, the Clicks game from 20 years ago.
I
And
think I hear a collective groan from people, even though we both like it.
yeah, because Jordan Wiseman, which was both the creator of Dark Age but also the creator of BattleTech in the 80s, one of the creators, is on record saying the, the Clicks game made more money in the first 12 months than FASA corporation did in its entire existence. And this is
Wow.
a period in the 90s where Battletech had an animated series, had multiple successful video games, had a novel line, had tons of stuff, right? And Arcade simply blew that out of the water. Why? First, the rules were much, the base rules were much simpler and clearer to get into. The rule book was
Yep.
like a small thing. But then the greatest revolution was actually having a lot of the mathematical values and resolution of the rules actually built into the actual basis of the miniatures, the clicks system, and that solved a lot of the I have to consult this table, or I don't know the resolution of these values, or depending on the damage of the mech I have to do some math because now the armor values and the attack values change and all that. All of that stuff is in the click space. The hit management is in the click space. Some of the abilities were in the click space, so it made the game really really easy to get into, even though it still had the tactical depth of maneuvering on the game board, and you still had to know some rules, but it was so much easier to get into than Battletech. And I think it's not a popular thought, but I see even old school Battletech players are playing more Alpha Strike these days. In part, that is because they are playing games with a larger amount of mechs. So if you're playing regular Battletech at a certain point, it becomes a bit unfeasible. Takes too long. But I think it's also because some of them have expressed that opinion to me, and I see people on on the Everything BattleTech Discord and all that. There are a lot of people who are say they play BattleTech and say they like the game and the depth and the grindiness and etc. And then they are playing Alpha Strike. So I think there's something there to be said about, yeah, at a certain point, if even your base rules are like 200 pages or something like that, it's a bit too overwhelming, and you either learn from someone that is playing the game that isn't actually going too deep into the rules, or it becomes overwhelming really fast.
Yeah. No, and it does. And we have to recognize as developers not only our own objectives, but that, like you mentioned earlier, there's so much stuff now fighting for our potential players or our community's attention
Yeah.
that we have to factor in um, focus, like how much focus a player can dedicate to your game, and you know, how much time is it going to take them in order to have an enjoyable experience where they feel fulfilled. You know, whether they win or lose, they still have to feel fulfilled that it was worth their time,
Yeah.
because if not, they'll quickly leave. And um, that's sometimes, you know, sometimes you can do your best to predict these will be the elements that'll allow the player to have the most fun, but you can't know that for certain until you really get it out into the hands of people. But you can do things to make things easier, and I think being mindful of that will create an environment as you're being creative that you'll maybe answer some of the problems, or you know, cut them off before they become a problem, because you're already keeping that in your mind.
And this is something that really needs some balance, right? And obviously, I'm not doing anything, but like I usually say, everything has been invented, right? What you can do is provide, like, there are lots of people who cook pasta, but then some people, the pasta is more enjoyable than others, because that's the your particular way of putting together the recipe. So, one of the brilliances of X-Wing, and you know this because you also play like Star Wars Legion, was inserting into a miniatures game the traditional ease to get into that card games usually have, because most of the you for a card game you need to know like how to basically play it, and then after that every like side rule, optional rule, effect, attack value, defense value, whatever it is usually on the card itself. And
Right.
X-Wing incorporated that accessibility element into the game, where you the point wasn't that you have to pick up two different books and have them open with you while you were playing to consult different tables in different pages. You had the stuff in the cards, and that is also what I'm doing with Black Star. Uh, with Black Star, aside from learning how to basically play the game, like how the game works at its base level, everything else I want to have in the cards. Is there an optional rule? Is there an optional rule for the heavyweight situation or and all that? I prefer it to be a card that the player can put on the table to make that play at that time, and everything you need to know about that firewall forest on fire situation is a card that you play in that minute, and everything is in the card, instead of players having to memorize the rules or having to consult the rules in a manual. And that way it becomes much easier to get into, much faster to play, while at the same time you can put any amount of depth that you want in the cards that you are playing. So, and that's why I've kept saying that Black Star is a hybrid miniatures card game, because I want to have a lot of that accessibility while being deep aspect that card games have. A game like Magic is incredibly complex, but a game like Magic and its success is because it's easy to get into as well. You don't, if you know how to play a basic card game of Magic, you know how to play any game of Magic. Then it's just mastering how to build the decks and the interactions between the cards, and which cards are have the best abilities or the best interactions.
Yeah. And with like Revelation Skirmish, I wanted to, in a similar way of you have your stat profile that you can get right off of our stats website, and it'll print your list as you build it, for your
Which is really
forces.
useful.
And it's all the stuff that you need to know about your particular unit is right there on its stat profile. All the
Yeah.
keywords, what the keywords do, everything is right there. All the numbers that you're going to need for that particular unit. The modifiers that you need to memorize are very simple. You know, it's actually even on a reference sheet on the back of the rule book if you were to print it out. where it's it's just basic line of sight and a couple other conditions. Other than that, it's very very straightforward. And because trying to make it where I loathe the idea of having to constantly open a book to see the stats of my one unit.
Right.
I do not want to do that. I want it all right in front of me, and I want to be able to see my opponents. And that's one barrier for me with like Warhammer, is because yeah, I can try to memorize all the different stats, but at the end of the day, I don't have the mental capacity or the desire to memorize 10 factions worth of stats just because when I'm fighting other factions so that I can know what I'm supposed to do. Yeah, you'll pick up some just because you're like, oh, I remember that unit. That unit needs to die first. I have to shoot that one. That one just has to go away. But you don't remember all the other individual stat values. But I wanted it where it's all laid right there. You can set it on the table, off to the side. You want to consult your opponents, you can see everything just as easy as you can with yours. So it's eliminating um, the need for memorization or the need for multiple manuals. But at the same time, from my perspective, I wanted to eliminate table clutter. So there isn't pre-game upgrades currently. Right now, you just print the stat profile, and that's what it is. And we'll have the different variants already on the site, so you can pick. Okay, I want the Sierra with the shield, with the energy weapon. All right, there you go. There's the stats. You don't have to worry about because that is one sometimes downside to games like X-Wing or Star Wars Legion, where if you're playing a really big game, like if you're wanting to go above the standard, there's so much cards and upgrade cards and all this other. And if you bump it, oh my goodness, you can
Yeah.
you can spend 5 more minutes having to fix everything in the middle of a game or in the middle of a turn.
I know
But
what you mean, and the initial I've actually been not concerned but thinking about this because the initial version for Black Star was like a data sheet for the Mechs, right? I didn't include customization in that. These are the Mechs and they have a few variants and that's it. That enabled, like you mentioned, really a small amount of table clutter. Like you don't have like A4 sized record sheets and with lots of tokens everywhere and lots of upgrade cards everywhere and all that. You just had a clear, like I call it the data slate, but a clear readout of the abilities and everything the Mech has, and you don't really need to know a lot more about it, right? But then I added customization, in part because a lot of people requested it, and in part because some of the unit types for some of the unit types it does make sense combined with 3D printing and all the games files being available for printing at home. It does make sense that players should be able to mix and match and take parts out and put parts in and all that. That created the challenge that now that data slate needs to integrate several different upgrades, which means I have to make a system for the players to apply upgrades on top of the data slate, which would be like other cards. And now you have a data slate with multiple cards on the table. What I think does help me in terms of the overall game design of Black Star is that I don't have a lot of units on the table at any one time, right? Most games will be 1v1 or 2v2 or something like that. They won't really
yeah,
go over that. So that means at most you're gonna be in command of like 2 mechs or 3 mechs at most, which does help with that aspect.
oh yeah, yeah,
But there is a concern about, again, like you said, sometimes you were using like a lot of different units in other games and you ended up with a lot of different, like the menu area of your table was filled with stuff, and then you also had the rule books and all that, and it, again, it becomes overwhelming for new players. um, Once again, the brilliance of the click system and the Dark Age stuff, and before that obviously Mage Knight, which is where the click system comes from, was that the player on the other side of the table doesn't need to go to your side of the table to look at your record sheet or something like that. He just needed everything he needed to know was just look at the miniature. The attack value is there, the defense value is there, the special ability is there, all that stuff. And that was the brilliance of the click system. That's why it was so successful, so easy to get into.
Yeah. No, and I loved it
Yeah,
for what it was. And yeah, there is some downside because as you were taking damage, your stats were changing and sometimes you went past as a player, you went past where you wanted to be, but you had to kind of just figure it out and just deal with it. And um
but that also, that in part was just a design decision that the makers did, right?
yes.
You don't
Yes.
necessarily have to have the values changing, but on the flip side of that, it gave some unpredictability to the game because some units, even though their stats got worse, they actually gained like less stand abilities and stuff like that. So there were units that people were using that were incredibly dangerous only when they were close to dying. Then they
Yeah.
became really powerful. So we actually wanted them to soak up damage in order for them to get to that state. If you didn't know that, you were caught unaware. It was
Yeah.
unpredictable. And if you did know it, it's yet another strategy that the game gave players the option to use, making it more deep than just like regular attack values. Because
Yeah.
now you had the player that actively was trying to get damaged and was actively trying to activate one ability in particular. So you had to change your entire play style to deal with that, stuff like that. And that gives depth to the game system without overwhelming new players.
Yeah, and I agree. And for I personally and incorporated this also into Revelation Skirmish is the tokens for in the middle of the battlefield. I know some people don't care for tokens because like we mentioned it does create a sense of table clutter. Um I personally like tokens because it takes away me having to remember things
Right.
because I set this token on this guy and this one on this guy. Now I look down and immediately both players can know exactly what's happening because I want it to be more or less where if someone was watching the game and they're going back and forth between tables that they could come back over, look down and pretty much know what's going on. They could see what's been activated, what's still left to be activated, who has done what in terms of token related actions or effects. And then yeah, they may not know who attacked who and such, but they can get a pretty good sense of the game really fast. And that way it eliminates players having to remember, okay, this mech ran, and by running, if he shoots at this guy, there's going to be a modifier. Like you're just resolving all that immediately, as opposed to uh, having to retain it. And I know that people who play BattleTech will use different dice and just d6s and stuff to remember their modifiers, and then the color of the dice indicates what it is. But that was a custom rule that people were doing to help the game for
Yeah.
years,
Because you
as
had
opposed to being
right.
built into the game right away.
Because you had too much stuff to track, and people started using all those sorts of house rules, and now I think BattleTech actually announced some official like dice with modifiers and all that, and again it's a lot of dice with a lot of different attack range and defense modifiers and all that. So you still need to keep track. You'll need to keep track of your actual tracking dice, which is like an
Yeah.
inception of dice.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, you mentioned like the tokens from, for example, from Legion or X-wing. I remember when Fantasy Flight were developing and presenting Legion right before the game launched. They gave one of the designers gave an interview talking about they found during focus testing that people enjoyed the physicality of interacting with the play pieces. In this case, having the tokens, taking tokens out, um, according to their focus testing, it brought players more connected to what was happening during the gameplay. And if you take that into consideration, you'll remember that again, MechWarrior Dark Age also had that, because when there was resolutions for the attacks, you had to turn the hit dial, and you had to turn the actual main dial, and you had to hear the click. And this was so satisfying when you hit an opponent and you cause like 4 points of damage, and now the other player has to go click their base, and then you have you flamed someone and now they have to click their hit tile, and all these manual physical interactions with the actual playing pieces were a consequence of the gameplay and a reflection of the rules happening in real time, and with auditory kinesthetic effects, the clicking. So I think a lot of people don't think about these elements, but your brain does. Like that red letter media meme. Like you're not thinking about it consciously, but your brain is. Your brain is
Right.
capturing all these signals and interpreting them as fun or not fun, as connectiveness or disconnected.
Yeah. And uh, the only downside, not maybe not the only, but one of the primary downsides to like the click spaces was that you had to physically touch the models to do the damage as opposed to just recording it separately. So that way there wasn't the interference of the human not setting it down exactly where it was or bumping something else slightly, when sometimes that makes the difference between who's in range and who isn't.
Oh yeah, yeah. Witnessed and was obviously inserted in a few of those discussions, right? No, no, no. The model was 2 millimeters to the side. It wasn't exactly where we put that. No, no, no. The model was in contact with that forest base, or or in other cases you had fabrication issues where the dial was actually really hard to turn.
Oh yeah, that did happen as well. Or it was super easy to turn, and then as you're bumping
Yeah,
it, it might actually go too far.
yeah. Or
So
for due to, or the Mac in the base was actually like had again a malfunction and you actually broke it or glued it while you
I had
yeah.
I had one player, and this is where kind of as more of a competitive person wanting to be able to track things at all times from even from my opponent. Um, with MechWarrior Dark Age in particular, I had a player. We were playing. It was a local game. It was at the store I always played at, but it was for, I believe, the game was for so that we could qualify to play in nationals.
Right.
And the guy I was playing was one of the better players at the store, and I think the maximum number of spots on a mech dial I believe was it 18?
I don't
I
remember
think
anymore.
maybe it was like 24.
I think it was 23 or 24. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously the very last spot on the dial has to be dead,
Yeah.
right? There's no other. So at max you have 23 health. Um, so there was one particular mech that I knew how much damage I had been mentally tracking how much damage I had done, because I knew if I could just get it to the dead spot, it was done.
Yeah.
And that was most of his points on the table. It was the big strong unit he had. So I'm like, okay, if I can just focus that one down enough, it's gone. And what he was doing was he would pick it up, click it forward, and then subtly click it backwards. So he was adding health to the mech as I'm damaging it. And I had mentally tracked. And at one point, I'm like, I've done more than 24 damage to you. There is literally no possible way your mech is still in the fight. And the judge came over and we resolved it, but he didn't get disqualified and kicked. The guy just kind of covered for him and like, okay, well, it's dead. And then I won the game because there's nothing really left to stop me. So I just finished. But I was furious because if I hadn't been tracking,
Yeah.
he would have gotten away with that.
Yeah.
There would be no way for me to know that he wasn't, unless I was counting. I wouldn't know how much damage I had done. I could say, well, I think I've done, enough, but I was mentally tracking. Okay, I've done 2 damage here. I've done 4 damage here. I've done another 3 damage. So I kept it a tally in my head. So now with like Revelation Skirmish, you just have the damage dots and you fill those in. And then once you've reached enough to kill it, now mechs will have legs, arms, and torso. But still, you can keep track of the basic math. If you know that Sierra has 14 health in its torso, you know it doesn't take much to be able to destroy that one unit. You're able to kind of mentally track that, and you can see your opponent's sheet right away. Most players are never going to run into a situation where someone's actively, purposefully cheating,
I've
as
seen it.
opposed to, I've accidentally wrote down 6. It should have been 7. It was my fault. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. I was counting, and I just didn't count to 7. But there are some people who purposely go out of their way, and that is my concern with games like Guild Ball had it, War Machine, where you're using more of a dry erase markers.
Yeah.
Because even when I've been playing, I've accidentally, because you're just doing all the things and you accidentally bump something and you've wiped off a section of damage. You're like, oh my, I can't remember how much. And then you have to stop and ask the opponent, like, did
Look.
that box have 3 or did it have 2 tallies? I can't remember. I accidentally wiped it off.
Look, sometimes accidents happen, right? And
Oh yeah,
mistakes
yeah, yeah,
happen.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I've been in situations where, like, oh, yeah, I just forgot, like, I was given like 17 damage to mark on my mech, and I just put 16. Or sometimes I put 18. But I've seen people cheat, and yeah, I have seen that clicks Dark Age situation happen before, or where that's why I remember people being really eagle-eyed watching the opponent turn the clicks base precisely because of that stuff, and you're watching and you're listening, how many times did it click, and you were watching which direction did he turn it into.
Right.
Yeah. I guess at the end of the day, if people want to cheat, people want to cheat. Sometimes mistakes happen, but no one. In other words, maybe you accidentally put one less damage value on your armor dots, for example. That's just an accident, but no one is clicking value on your clicks, damage on your clicks base, and accidentally puts it forward, healing it. That's not an accident. That's on purpose.
No, no, you don't click both directions.
Yeah, that's on
Unless
purpose.
you are counting, and sometimes you did go too far or not far enough. There was that on accident,
Yeah.
but
Or
it's just
again, I have a correction, because it can be accidental in these cases when the clicks base is too loose and you actually turns too easily,
yes,
and then you
yeah.
turn it too far. Or I remember when the a mech where the base was too tight, and the best way to actually input damage making it move was actually first putting it one forward and then coming back. But then you had to pay attention all the match.
Hmm. Yeah. And my intention with like the way that I move forward with new mechanics or the way that I move forward with, because I'm trying to be mindful of eliminating fights between players.
Right, right.
Um, because I don't want there to be a 10-minute long conversation going back and forth of rules of intended and rules as worded, and trying to make sure that it's able to be resolved really quickly and move forward, and hopefully eliminate, because sometimes when you're playing, you might get a little competitive and you might get a little upset that your guys aren't doing as good as what you feel they should be, or you've been rolling like crap. And you just still want things to be in a way where it facilitates as best you can, facilitates good behavior, and trying to be sportsmen, and you set that down as fundamentals for your game, and you're not like win at all costs, crush them. And some, I don't know, some games have that atmosphere, and then others are like super casual and like, look, dude, we're just here to have fun. Like, it doesn't matter if we worded this perfect. Like, no, it does matter if you word it well, but you know Just depends on it also that sometimes that'll be affected by the player base, and you can't control as the developer. I can't control that your one player group out in Kansas is hyper competitive, and they don't want new players in, and they try to present the rules in a way where new players aren't going to feel comfortable. And the best we can do is that if the player downloads the rules or buys the rules, depending on your product, that it's presented as easily accessible as possible, and not overly burdensome for them to resolve.
In terms of that, Black Star will have a rule that I don't remember if it's based on the old Shadowrun card game or if it's based on the rule on Munchkin, but it will have a rule where if players are arguing and complaining against each other for more than 60 seconds, just flip a coin or roll a die, and whoever gets it, precisely to avoid those situations. Because I, I think we've all seen these types of situations escalate from arguing for a minute to arguing 5 minutes to screaming for 10 minutes to feast fights and every to throwing the miniatures to everything in between, right? So if there is some ambiguity in some specific situation that happens, if it lasts more than 60 seconds, just flip a coin or roll a die, and whoever gets it. Because at a certain point, the players won't really be in agreement, or they will end
Yeah.
up agreeing on something, but it either lasted, the discussion lasted too long, or it's more one of them begrudgingly gave up complaining about it, but he will be salty the rest of the entire match. So just listen. The rules are the rules. If you still can't decide, roll a die. Whoever gets the highest wins.
Yeah. And because as a developer, you can't predict every single possible situation because players will come up with the craziest ways of,
Yeah,
and somehow they got this like perfect alleyway right between multiple rules. Where you're like, okay, this is a weird situation. We don't know what to resolve here. And it does. And Revelations also has a rule where at some point you just need to understand, just roll, figure it out, resolve it right there with a roll and then just move forward and then figure it out afterward. Um, I also do have a rule about sportsmanship. It's at the
yeah,
very end of the book. It's more of a player etiquette than a physical rule, but it, tries to encourage um, good behavior because, you know, I've I've been part of groups where I haven't felt welcomed, and this is a different conversation, but like
yeah,
putting that is doing the best I can as the developer to facilitate a positive environment for all players as best I can. Uh, so that, and at the end of the day, I can't control if they act like adults,
yeah,
but
yeah. I mean,
I don't want to reward bad behavior either.
you try the most you can. Now, watch competitive Black Star players again doing the schoolwork report mechanic. They're gonna let every time 60 seconds pass in order to resolve every play with just a dice, and since they had a loaded dice, they will always win that. So watch them turn every play into an argument in order to get the 60 seconds. People
I,
will
I
do
I
everything.
guess that is, yeah. If I see someone pull out some special resolve die, I'll be
Yeah.
like, let me see that real quick.
Oh, that's your lucky die. Let me see how it throws. Let me throw it a few times to see what the results are.
Yeah.
I feel this weights more in this particular six than any other number. I wonder. I wonder.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or why are you trying to resolve all your plays so slow while the timer is counting?
Yeah, and that kind of goes into your tournament or your event rules to try to encourage the whoever the organizer is to again facilitate a positive environment
Yeah,
and a fun environment because at the end of the day also for us as developers, I don't want to encourage bad behavior because that will push away players, which means it's pushing away potential sales and growth for my business.
Oh yeah,
So I have to protect it because I don't want people being like, I love Revelations the way it looks, but the guys that make it are jerks and they want all the jerks to play their game. And I'm not interested in playing with jerks.
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
go play some other game,
yeah.
and then, and it's not just financial thinking, but you don't want to you don't want bad players involved necessarily, but you don't want to create an environment where it pushes away, casual or decent players either.
Yeah, I mean, if your game has the reputation that the game's players are assholes, you're not gonna play it. Or all the judges or all the like games masters of this game are dicks, then I'm not gonna play it. And I haven't gotten into video games that I thought were really interesting because I heard like the online community are all cheaters full of aimbots and hacks and all that. Then I'm not gonna play the game. So, but on the other side, I mean, try to do that as a developer, but at a certain point, it's out of your hands.
Yeah, and I think part of it falls to us to facilitate in our communities. Well, if you interact with your community, which I know both of us do,
Yeah,
um, and you try to set the standard of like, this is how I want all of us to interact together, mature, kind, considering, you know, um, and being in an environment that is kind and not just,
and not
you
try
know.
to be dicks.
Yeah,
I
well,
mean,
pretty much a number one life rule.
I've been playing this game for 4 years. I know everything like the palm of my hands, and here comes this like new kid that has never played, and I'm gonna make the most out of like crushing him. He will leave this gaming table never wanting to exist again. He will want to crawl under a hole. Obviously that's not a good attitude.
No, no.
And again, that player will probably be like, "Oh my god, this game is brutal. I'm gonna sell my miniatures and never play again."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, right. And who wins in that scenario? Like the jerk guy kind of got a win, but it's very fleeting. Like you'll never get that again from that person because they're gone.
yeah,
And the business lost, the new player lost. It just all around the community that could have been stronger, whether locally or on the internet, lost that new person who could have been a phenomenal voice to add to the group,
yeah,
and now they're gone.
yeah.
So it's a loss across the board.
Um, and again, that's in terms of all the rules. Just don't overwhelm new players. Don't overwhelm new people. I think the
Hmm.
key word for a lot of people, accessibility games gain sort of a negative connotation that it means it's dumbed down. No, it's just easy to get into. Then you can have all sorts of depth that you want, as long as you structure the rules correctly, and preferably if that player is being taught by someone that wants to nurture the community and the game. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers the subject of today's podcast, right, Rick? Do you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
anything else to add?
Um, no, I mean, as far as the last bit to make a point on with the depth that I meant to mention before is when I have taught and demoed Revelation Skirmish to new players, for the most part, if I'm playing against someone who's played miniature games before, so they understand certain mechanics or ways of playing just miniature games in general, I can usually cover just about every one of the mechanics in a demo game in an hour and a half, and they pretty much get the full experience of the whole game in one sitting. Now, granted, I'm an experienced player teaching an inexperienced player,
Right.
but the rules are very accessible. Um, like you were mentioning, for new players, if you had two new people, they should be able to pick it up fairly quick,
Yeah.
and jump it. Because I don't like quick start rules because I know that first game is going to be so watered down that I
Mm.
don't know what I don't know yet about the more complicated mechanics. And like I can enjoy that to get maybe like the very preliminary, but I pretty much want to be able to get a decent grasp of the rules quicker. Now I might be the outlier. Most people, and I don't have any data. More people might enjoy the quick start rules because they can kind of get into it. I don't currently have a quick start rule really provided for Revelation Skirmish just because um, there hasn't been a community need. If the community started speaking up saying, "Hey, when I'm teaching new people, I can tell it feels like a too much," then I would just go and I'd create something additional to kind of help. But you know,
That's
it's just
that's
my
bec-
approach.
that's because you're interpreting it as the quick start rules will give people the wrong might give people the wrong idea of what the game is about. So they think, oh,
Right.
these are the quick start rules. So, but basically, this is what I feel playing the game. I didn't have fun, so I'm not gonna play the game anymore. Even though maybe the full rules were exactly what that guy was looking for. I think again an interesting topic, like how do you write quick start rules? Are the quick start rules a dumbed down version of your main rules, or just like the condensation of still exactly what the game is, just condensed into like this shorter package?
Right.
Because one will probably give you the same kind of feedback and the other won't. The other will give you like a superficial version, and maybe the people won't really like the superficial version, but they weren't capable of playing the full version. So how do you solve that problem, that challenge? Again,
And then also the approach of, do you want to encourage your players to read the whole rule book regardless of size? We'll just,
yeah,
do you want them to read the whole rule book, or do you want them to only read the quick start, which may be 3 pages, and maybe that's enough to get them in the game, and you just have to kind of make that judgment call. But I think that could be an interesting subject,
yeah, yeah. I
at least
can,
as a sub subject.
yeah, I can tell you my aim for Black Star, like I said, I want to have a lot of complexity, but I actually want the base rules to be really simple. So I won't have quick start rules because the main rules will be effectively the same. I'm for Black Star. I'm trying to go for a one-page rules approach. You know that website, that Patreon that does adaptations of the games for one-page rules. It's sort of a misnomer because most of the rules aren't exactly just one page, or some of them aren't. But the point, I don't want to have more than like 6 pages of rules or something like that, because everything else you can find stuff totally unexpected that you've never seen before. Situations you will find yourself in situations during matches of Black Star that you haven't encountered before, but everything you need will be on the table, which is the mechs, the data slates, and the cards. Just read the card. You might not know the card, just look at the card. Just read it, see what it does, and that's all you need to know. And it's a totally new situation that you find yourself into. Instead of putting all of this stuff in 120 pages of manual, and then you have to flip to a specific page to find it out. In addition to making players involved in both players involved in the rule, because you're making one player make tactical decisions regarding which cards to play, actually consume resources by playing the card, and then involving the players in entirely in the situation that is being created by the interaction between the playing pieces and the cards. So
Yeah.
that was my advertisement for Black Star.
And I actually, I'm looking forward to getting to play that down the road as well, just because I'd like to see how, because I've never played a game, honestly, I haven't played a miniatures game with uh rules that are that condensed. So
Right.
I'm interested just as like a player, just being like, how does that work? What does that look like? How does that make me feel as a player, and kind of just processing all of that as well.
See, remember the example I gave of BattleTech previously? Like, I'm gonna have, instead of having like a page or multiple pages with multiple tables to consult when the Mech is putting out the middle finger in his right hand and is raising his left
Yeah.
foot 30 degrees and all that. I'll just make a card that includes all of that with the illustration, and it has the stats modifiers in the card, and you just have to look at it. And it's the exact same situation, and it's modifying what's actually happening on the table, which was in itself its own situation already on the table. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. It's gonna be cool.
So you heard it first. One of the Black Star cards is Mech in an uncomfortable position.
Yeah.
That's all for me, guys. Rick, do you have anything else to add?
No, I think this is good.
All right, everyone. We'll see you guys next week for a new episode, and I hope you all enjoyed this one and have a great week and great weekend. See you later, guys.
Bye, guys.